Thank you so much. And it's a real pleasure to be with you today. Okay, I'm going to share with you my journey. Glenda used the word not just survive, but thrive. And my journey has been around asking questions about how we help people thrive. What's the best way to do that? I'm going to share that with you. And each one has been a separate journey. So that's my first question. How do we help children and families thrive? And I've been asking that since I was a teacher myself a long time ago. But I'd actually like you to think of your questions too. If you're virtual, think of something that you've wondered about with the children or families in your lives. It could be a small thing, a big thing, just something that you've been curious about yourself. And if you could write that down to yourself so that you don't forget it, or write it in the chat if you're virtual so that we can see it. And I'll go back to my questions. My first question was, how do we keep the fire for learning burning in children? Burning in their eyes, actually, because you can see it in their eyes. Patricia Kuhl, who measures engagement, actually says that she can see it, what is happening in the brain when children are engaged, but you can also just see it in their eyes. And that question came to me because I was doing a study on youth and looking at learning. And what I found when I went out around the country to interview young people in the 5th through the 12th grades about learning was not a lot of excitement about learning with older kids. They were, I'd say, tell me about something that you'd learned, and they just sit there. Tell me about something, it didn't have to be in school. Tell me about something that you learned in church, or something that you learned in a sport, or something that you learned that you cared about. And they would sit there. Then I would say, okay, tell me about something that you didn't learn. Then I'd get energy. They could tell me about things that they didn't learn. And that parallels national studies that have found about 40 to 60% of young people are disengaged in learning in school, which is, I think, very upsetting for our country, because we need learning. We're born with learning. At the time that I was out talking to young people and was seeing that I just couldn't get them very excited about learning, my next door neighbors had adopted 2 little girls from China. And although they hadn't had the best experience in their lives, they had been in an orphanage for the 8 months until they brought them home. Even when, and one of them was very sick and almost died in her first few months at home. Even then, those little girls were just wanting to see and to taste and to touch and to experience everything. And if you look at, for those of you who work with little kids, you look at their eyes and you can see that so many of them are engaged in learning. So my question had been, what are we doing as a society to turn off that fire in children's eyes? Because I wasn't seeing it when I was talking to older children very often. I could get there, but it took real pushing and pulling to get there. In fact, in one study that was asked why children go to school, what do you think the #1 reason was? You can't answer me, so I'll just answer the question, but it was because it's the law, or to see my friends. And only 39% of kids said that they went to school to learn. So I think we've got an issue in our society, and I wanted to better understand it. So because I'm a researcher, my first instinct is to start with the science. That's actually one of the bookshelves in my house, where I have some of my workbooks. And that's what I knew I wanted to do, to start with the science. But then I had a question, and that's really the first question, which is, how do I, well, I'll just go back. And how do I then share that science with parents and with teachers? And we did a series of focus groups around the country to answer that question. How can we best share the science? If we're going to look at the science of what keeps children engaged in learning, how can we share it? And there was in one focus group, it was in Baltimore, and we were sitting behind that two-way mirror the way you do in focus groups, if you've ever done that. And a woman in the focus group turned around and she looked at the mirror. We were behind it, and she started to go like this. And she said, research. She said, first you say drink red wine, and then you say don't drink red wine. And then you say eat red meat, and then you say don't eat red meat. She said, I want to know who those researchers are and how they know what they know about my child. I want to know if they could walk in my shoes. And I thought, that's exactly right. That's exactly what we need to know. So the best way to do that was to introduce you to the researchers. And here are the researchers in early childhood, about 100 of them, whom I have interviewed since 2001, is to actually take virtual field trips to their labs and find out who they are as people and the questions that they have and the kind of journeys that they go on to answer their own questions. So that's what I've been doing ever since 2001, taking virtual field trips with a film, yes, with a camera, not film, but video, to share our trip or our journey with all of you in action. So some of the things we found are are the importance of the early years, that there are a million connections being made every second, and that's forming the foundation for learning now in the future. You can think of it as the architecture of the brain, because the brains are built from the bottom up. But it's and so the structure, the foundation of the brain that is being built in the early years, even actually prenatally, those experiences, I've been studying that lately, are really important. But it's not just genes. It's that experience writes on our genes. It's that interaction there to understand what happens to the development of neurons in the brains. We took a field trip to Samuel Wang's lab, and you can see that in the picture. And he looks at the neurons and how they develop in the brain. And what I loved about that trip was he turned to me, and he had a 6-year-old daughter at the time. And he said, sometimes I look at her and she might be having a fight with another kid, or eating a pizza, or, throwing a banana at her sister, or whatever, that 6-year-olds sometimes do. And and she just think of what was happening in the brain. And it was just a miracle. But he, like others say, and I know this both from looking at adolescence, I'm doing a book now on adolescence, and from the work that I've done on the transition to parenthood, is that there are times when the brain is very plastic. The early years is one of them, but so is adolescence, and so is the transition to parenthood. When we're expectant parents, our brains are changing extremely dramatically. Just as the brains are changing in the early years. So it's never too late. Change is always possible. Better to get it right in the beginning, but never too late. What getting it right means is through relationships. I don't remember if you all remember the slogan when Bill Clinton ran for president, and he said, "It's the economy, stupid. Everything depends on the economy." Well, in developmental research, in child development, adolescent development, adult development research, it's all about relationships. It's the relationship stupid. And positive relationships are essential for healthy brain development. That's the fuel. That's what creates healthy brain development. One of the studies that we looked at that tells this story so well is Ed Tronick, who is at Boston, University of Massachusetts at Boston. And that's a little girl. Her name is Mackenzie. She is 6 months old. She's sitting in her infant seat, and she's facing her mom. Her mom's picture is on the right of my screen on my computer. And Ed Tronick says to the mom, just do the normal things you would do with Mackenzie. And they play and they laugh, and this little piggy, went to market up her leg, and Mackenzie is laughing. And then Tronick says to the mom, okay, turn to the side, and then come back, and then make a still face, like a frozen face. Don't respond at all. And you should, some of you have probably seen this video, but you should see what happens to Mackenzie. First, she reaches out. She tries to do everything to get her mom back to connecting with her. She flails her arms then when it doesn't work. She kicks her feet. She makes fussy noises, and she yells and fusses. And finally, she just gives up. And different children react in different ways. But that just shows you that thing that we take for granted, that give and take, is so important in relationships. I have done this with groups of adults, and anyone who's done the Mind in the Making training will know, will have seen this, where you see that that if you take two adults and you have one person tell a story that's important and someone else listen to it but have a still face, that it gets very disconcerting for the person who is the storyteller. They'll say, "What's wrong with me?" Or, "Is the story boring?" Or, "Did I eat onions for lunch?" And so that normal give and take, we take it for granted, but it's really the ingredient that is critical in healthy development. And what it is that back and forth interaction, that give and take, serve and return. You can call it volleying, going back and forth, taking turns, whatever you want to call it. It's absolutely essential for brain development. And I'll talk more about that now and then in a moment. I'm back to Pat Kuhl's lab. She's the one who said you can see engagement now. She's measuring it. That little girl is very engaged. She is 11 months old. If the camera pulled back and you could see the video that we made of her, you would see that she's wearing this helmet kind of thing, like a bike helmet. You can see the strap under her neck. Looks like Pat Kuhl calls it a hairdryer from Mars. What's amazing about that machine, it's an MEG machine. What's amazing about it is that it takes a movie of the brain in action. So you can actually see what's going on in the brain when the mom, like Elodie, this child, or like Mackenzie, the child I just showed you, were just doing normal things with a parent. What is happening in Elodie's brain, and you can see it to the right, is that the areas of the brain that hear sound light up. But not just that area lights up. Over to the left of the picture, you can see the word Broca. The Broca area lights up. And the Broca, what the Broca area of the brain does, it's the part of the brain that rehearses what we're going to need to do when we take action. Like if you're walking into a room, you'll rehearse what you're going to do when you get into that new place. Or you're skiing, you think about what it's going to take to go skiing, or playing tennis, or anything that you do, driving a car. We're rehearsing what we do. And what Elodie is doing is, she doesn't speak yet. She just says ma, 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 da, 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 but she's rehearsing the things that she'll need to do when she learns to talk. And she can't, again, talk yet. So people who say you shouldn't talk to babies, yes, you should, because even before they can talk, they're rehearsing. The brain is like a statistical machine that's putting together the sounds that go together in their native language, or languages if they speak more than one language. And they are rehearsing what they'll need to know. And that early talking to babies makes such a difference. But it's not just talking, it's the turn taking. It's giving a child the chance to respond, going back and forth. The brain is not a sponge. Some people have thought of the brain as a sponge. The brain is built for action. Children are active learners, and that's critical to remember. Another lesson from the research is the importance of executive function skills. Remember, my question was about how kids thrive. And I began to see clues, like little, for some reason, I'm thinking of leaving breadcrumbs and finding your way through the woods. It was like a breadcrumb here and a breadcrumb there. I looked at the research on social development, and I would begin to see that kids who were good at taking the perspectives of other people were more likely to thrive. And I'd look at literacy, and the kids who could figure out the patterns and stories were more likely to thrive. And you'd look at anything you wanted to look at, any academic subject. And it came back to a set of core skills that are called executive function skills. And it took me actually a number of years in going out to many researchers because people call it different things. People call it theory of mind, they call it executive function, they call it self-regulation. Depending on the field, it's called different things, but it all has to do with some core capacities that are called executive functions. This is in the lab of Phil Zalazzo at the University of Minnesota, and he actually measures executive functions. And this child is given a task. There you can see a box, and you can see a picture of a bus, and you can see a picture of a star, and they're blue and they're red. And sometimes the child will play the shape game. So if this child is playing the shape game, Walter is playing the shape game, his job is to put the picture of a star in the box that has a picture of a star and a picture of a truck in the slot where there's a picture of a truck. He's sorting those pictures and only looking at the shape of them. So whether the star or the bus are blue or red, he's supposed to ignore those. That's a distraction, and just pay attention to the shape. Then the experimental will say, now we're going to switch and we're going to play the color game. And now if it's blue, put it in the box where there's a blue picture. And if it's red, put it into the box with a red picture. And Walter really struggles with that. He is 4, and sometimes he can do it. But when it came time to switching and going from shapes to color, he kept going back to the shape game. You can see that sort of see through it, that it's a picture, that picture is red, of a red star, and he's not putting it in the correct box. So the skills behind that very simple seeming task are working memory. You've got to remember the information that you need to solve the problem. You've got to think flexibly, because remember the problem changed. It was colors or shapes, and then it was colors. And you've got to use inhibitory control. That's the third aspect. Inhibitory control, and not go on automatic, but change when the rules change. And those 3 capacities underlie executive function skills, which are so important, as we'll see. And Walter is just beginning to develop these as a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old in the early years. The precursors are there, but they're really being developed pretty strongly in those early preschool years. So those of you who work with preschoolers, it's a critically important time for the development of these skills. Another skill comes in here too, and it's reflection. If he makes a mistake, if Walter makes a mistake, he needs to pause and think about what the mistake was so that he can learn from it, monitor the mistake, learn from it. That reflection is very important as one aspect of executive function as well. So these skills are attentional skills. We pay attention. It's what we're paying attention to is what we learn. And they make it possible so that you can keep information in your mind so that you can use it, to think flexibly, and to resist the temptation to go on automatic. Those are the major functions of executive function. Children, if you think about it, this is a paper that the Harvard Center did. And if you think about it, much learning is about content, colors, numbers, shapes, if you're a preschooler. But so that's the what of learning. But executive function skills are the how of learning. They're how you learn. And in fact, in that paper that the Harvard Center on the Developing Child did, they call executive functions the most important aspect of learning. They call it the air traffic controller of the brain, because that's a part of the in your brain, and it is right. It mostly takes place in your prefrontal cortex, this front part of your brain, connected to the other areas of your brain, and it really is. It really is the fuel for how you learn. And helping children understand how they learn are so important. Studies have shown, many studies have shown that kids with good executive function skills are more likely to be successful academically. I'll share some of those in a little bit. Here's one study that I particularly like. It was done by Megan McClellan. You'll meet her in a moment. And she was actually, in her earliest days, was not interested in executive function at all. She was doing a study of adopted children who were adopted in twins who were adopted in different homes, to see what was genetic, what was nature, what was nurture. But what they found is that 4-year-olds who were good at what's called attention span persistence, researchers make up big names like that, which always take me a while to remember them. Those kids who could pay attention, stick to a task, that was strongly predictive of, in fact, 50%, almost 50% more predictive of whether those kids graduated from college by the time they were 25 years of age or not. That totally changed, that study changed Megan's life, and she went on to study executive functions. They're also predictive of physical health and wealth. This is a study that was done in Dunedin, New Zealand. I particularly like talking about this study because I've been to Dunedin, New Zealand. It's a beautiful town. They followed all the kids from birth on to the age of 32 in this particular study. I'm sure they're following them after that. And what they found is kids who were good at executive function skills, particularly self-control, were in better physical health. They were less likely to take substances or to have criminal convictions, and they were wealthier. They had better personal finances by the time they were 32, and it was more important than their socioeconomic status or their IQ. In fact, executive function skills are more important, as important or more important than IQ. Numbers of studies have found that. So it's also what employers are looking for. I've just finished a film on lessons from the pandemic for American education. And one of the people talking represents employers, and she says that employers are most interested in the kind of executive function skills that employees have. In this case, this is from the 2019, the latest Job Outlook survey. And what they found when they rated what they were looking for most was communication skills, problem solving skills, working in a team and initiative. All of those are based on executive functions skills. So once I found it, once you see something, you can't unsee it. And once I found the importance of executive function skills, that changed my life, just like it did Megan's. And I've been looking at that ever since, and saw that across the literature, there were 7 skills that were most important. I'm going to talk a little bit about each of them and what you can do with this knowledge. So here is Megan McClellan herself, the one with attention span persistence. And she developed a game that measures executive function skills, but it's also a game that you can play at circle time or any time that you're with kids. It's like Simon Says. She calls it the head to toe task. And here's the task. You put your hand on your head, and it's not Simon Says, but put your hand on your head, and the kids are all supposed to put their hands on their heads. They're doing it in the picture. And then the experimenter will say, put your hands on your toes, and then put your hands on your head, put your hands on your toes. And then she says, I'm going to get a little tricky now. When I say put your hand on your head and I show you putting your hand on your head, you do the opposite and you put your hands on your toes. Now, if you think about that, that's using working memory. You've got to remember the rules. The rules just changed and you've got to remember them. You've got to be flexible because the rules changed. And you've got to use self-control or inhibitory control, because the automatic would be to copy what she does rather than put your hands on your toes. And she found that kids who were good at playing that game had better literacy scores and better math scores. This is a study that she did with Head Start. Now that's something that all of you can do if you've got a child in your life. You can play those sorts of games. You could play Simon Says, you could play Mother May I, you could play Red Light, Green Light. In fact, Megan created a game like Red Light, Green Light as a way of helping children gain focus and self-control. And Glenda says that she thinks of this as the core skill. Focus and self-control is really the core set of skills that everything builds on. And she's right. These are core executive function skills, paying attention and using self-control. And everything does follow. And there's so many things that you can do to promote these skills. The next skill is perspective taking. And perspective taking is called theory of mind in the research. And what that does is, can you understand that someone else might think and feel differently than what you think and feel. And the way that researchers assess this is through, this is one of the tests of it. This is Alison Gopnik, and it's the crayons and paperclip experiment. So kids will be shown a box that's all closed up, and it's got pictures of crayons on it. And these are 4-year-olds. And she will say, the Alison Gopnik or the experimenter will say, what, so-and-so in the child care center, what do you think is in that box? And the child will say crayons, because there's a picture of crayons on the box. And then the child will open the box and see, no, they're not crayons in the box, they're paper clips. And then Allison will say to the child, see Philip over there? If Philip sees this box, what does Philip think is in it? And a child who can take the perspective of others will know that Philip hasn't seen that if you open the box, there are paper clips in it. So Philip would think that there are crayons in it, just like the original child did when he first saw it. But sometimes kids can't do that yet, haven't learned to do that yet. It is all a matter of learning, and they'll say crayons. They'll think there are paper clips in it because the child knows that there are paper clips in it. Those are things that you can promote perspective taking skills. Reading, for those of you who work with children in libraries, telling stories is a fabulous way to promote executive function skills. Every story that you read, you can talk about, what do you think the character in that story is thinking? What do you think the character in that story is feeling? What do you think the character is going to do next? What would you do next? So it's a way of being able to understand other people's perspectives and have a theory. It's called theory of mind. Have a theory about what that other person is thinking and feeling and liking and disliking and so forth. A really important skill in kids who are better at this skill, have a better adjustment to school. They understand what their teachers expect versus what their parents expect. They can understand literature better, no surprise. And they're better at conflict resolution because they have a better understanding of people's motives if there are fights among other children. The third skill is communicating. Communicating, I don't know how many of you know the 30 million word gap research that showed that kids who were from lower income families it was said that they knew 30 million fewer words by the time they were 5. That's an inexact, it was based on an estimate of not a whole lot of children, but is a really important finding. So a lot of people in response to that study thought, whoa, what we should do is just talk to children. But that's not true. Talking to children is important, but in a way that takes turns. Kathy Hirsch-Pasek, Roberta Golenkoff, and Lauren Adamson went back and looked at data that they had from a study and looked at the children who were good at communicating when they were 3 and found that those were the kids at 2 whose families took turns and gave the child a chance to talk. So if you're, again, a librarian reading to children or telling stories to children, or if you're a teacher or you're a parent, in a way that has them tell you back to you, have a conversation. I love what Catherine Snow, who studies literacy, says, which is the book is a platform for a conversation. That's really its purpose. Now, a researcher named Roberta Romeo has gone on to look at actually what's happening in the brain when children hear words. And when they hear words and there's a chance for them to take a turn, the brain develops in different ways. And that actually is what's predictive of better skills later on. The next skill is making connections, and that's fundamental in all of knowledge. That all of knowledge, almost all of knowledge, is built on the stand for or the represents theory. I have a pair of glasses and you can see them on a screen. If you saw them in the screen or real life, you know that they're glasses, that they're a real object. But if I wrote the word GLASSES, that would also stand for glasses. So you see how words stand for objects, and then the written word stands for other objects. Or you can see that these are 3 fingers, but if you saw the number 3 written out, you would know that it was stands for those three fingers. Again, if you think about knowledge, it's based on being symbolic representation. And that is something that children, again, are learning during these early years that is so important. It's, again, the basis of most knowledge. And it's the basis of scientific knowledge when you're learning about cause and effect. Alison Gopnik, we recently went back and filmed her with another experiment about how children use that, learn about that. And that is, that box lights up and she calls it a blinket detector. And she's putting blocks on in different patterns. And if you put 2 blocks on it and it lights up, then it's a blinket. So the task for the children is to figure out what the pattern of blocks is that make up a blinket. And she's found that little kids actually are pretty creative in thinking about this, and that older kids get a little bit more constrained. So life shuts down a bit of their creativity. And that's important because making unusual connections is creativity. And that's one thing that employers really want. I mean, we wouldn't have been able to have a vaccine for COVID, or we wouldn't be able to solve some of the big issues in the world if people didn't think outside of the box. Most all new products and services are based on someone seeing a connection that wasn't there before. So making connections is so fundamental, and you can promote them in so many ways. How do these two things go together? If you look at, my phone and my watch, what's the same about these and what's different? That's a way of making connections. Well, they're both silver, but they're very different shapes and have very different functions. So that, everyday ways of making connections is so important to developing that skill. Critical thinking, that's understanding what's valid and real, what knowledge is true and what knowledge isn't true. And that is so important. When I think of that skill, I always think of my daughter when her son, my grandson, was little. And one day he, of course it was a weekend, of course it was a holiday weekend, and he all of a sudden shot up to 104 temperature. And she had to figure out, she gave him some Tylenol and he spit it up. And then she didn't know whether, if she then gave him aspirin, whether she was overdosing him or not. And she tried to reach her doctor, and of course she couldn't reach him. Drugstore was closed, and she went on the internet and got 400 different answers, called her girlfriends and got different answers. And figuring out what's valid and real is so essential. And that's a skill that we teach children, but it's based on curiosity, which is why I asked you. We're drawn to look at things that are new and figure them out. This is an experiment that Laura Schultz did, and she made this little jack-in-a-box, and it's got a pig. You can see the pig and a duck. You can sort of see the yellow part of the duck in there that pop out, and it's got different levers. And what she found is she would show it to kids and let them figure it out, or she would show it to kids and have the adults show the kids how it worked. And what she found is that if the adults show the kids how it works, the kids don't play with it. They move on to the next thing. They're not interested anymore. And the lesson from that research is to let children answer their own questions. Don't answer them for them, but help them figure out how to answer them and how to figure out whether their answer is accurate or not. We have wonder games at dinner time in our family. This is something that you can do where we'll wonder about a question and figure out everything we know about it, and then go try to look it up. And then when we look it up, not always taking the information that we read as true, but really trying to think critically about what is true and how do we know if it's true. How do you know that the things that people are trying to sell you on television are true? That's another, the claims that are made on television are true. That's another game that we play in our family. Taking on challenges. A lot of people talk about resilience, but I think that the real skill here is not just being able to cope with something when things are hard. That's the foundation. But the next step is trying something new that's hard. And Stephanie Carlson at the University of Minnesota is another person who studied this. This child, when he came into the lab, got a choice of what toy he would most like to play play with. And then while he did a number of exercises, he had put it into that plastic box and locked the box. And then it was time for him to take it out and play with it, and was given a whole set of keys to open it. He had locked it before with a set of keys that look like that. And the trick here is that none of the keys work. And what they're measuring is how long he persists at a really difficult, in fact, impossible task. And what Stephanie Carlson has found is if that child just plays the game as himself, or in this case, he gets to pick someone he admires. Here he admired Batman, so he put on a Batman cape. How does he play the game? And what she's found out is that he will play the game for almost advance a year in his ability to work hard at a difficult challenge just by pretending to be someone else. So pretending is not play in the sense of it's frivolous. Pretending is a way that we learn to try something hard. Kids play cops and robbers. Kids play bad guys and good guys, and all of those kinds of games all of the time. And that's a way where they're figuring out how the world works and how they're learning at best to take on challenges. The final skill, the seventh skill, is self-directed engaged learning. And what's important is that it's social, emotional, and cognitive. We tend to talk about social emotional learning. Cognitive learning is critical too. And what's really important here is that kids be able to set goals, figure out what they want to do. So if you're a teacher and they come into your classroom, having them make a plan for the morning, or for free play time or whatever time you have, and then carrying through the plan, and then coming back and discussing how it worked or how it didn't. Setting goals and then being accountable to those goals is critical in learning. So now I know all of this. I've spent 10 years. This is, by now we're at 2009. And I've spent 10 years interviewing at that point up to about 85 researchers and reading more than 1,000 different studies. And my question is, well, what to do with all of this? I was writing a book, yes, but a book doesn't mean that this knowledge gets used. And I didn't do this journey not to have this knowledge useful to all of you. So my question was, how do you translate this into professional development material? And I actually hired someone to write a curriculum. I hired this group of people to write a curriculum to take the knowledge that we had gained. And I picked them because they had done another curriculum that had been very effective in bringing about change. But what I found that they did was they did a very traditional, I'm going to stand up, I'm the sage on stage, I'm going to tell you something, I'm going to tell you that I'm going to tell you, now I'm telling you, and now I told you. And it wasn't interactive, and it was all about kids. And so we said, stop, 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 stop. Everything we've learned about children's learning is that it has to be active, that it has to relate to me first. And so for adults, it should start with adults. That was our instinct. So we went out and we interviewed teachers and we said, tell us about a change when you've had a training or a professional development experience or any experience, and you really changed. And then we looked at what those experiences were. We also looked at the literature on adult change, and we found that we have to begin with adults, that teaching about early childhood has to begin with me and why these skills, for example, are important in my life. So we developed the modules that some of you are using in Nevada, and I'm so proud of that. Thank you so much for your partnership. The way we developed it was what I call civic science, the same way. We knew the research, we would write some exercises, and then we would go out. We had funding from the Kellogg Foundation, and we went out to Evansville, Indiana, or Portland, Oregon, or New York City, or Providence, Rhode Island. And we had funded these cities to work with us. And we tried out the exercises. And then the teachers or the parents or the people who were in our training programs, the parent educators, the healthcare people, came back and helped us rewrite them. if you see that adorable boy appearing in pictures, by the way, that's my grandson. You'll see him from time to time. They'll pop up. That's my daughter, and that's my grandson. I get to sneak in pictures of my family in the presentations I do because they make me happy. So we've developed modules that are in person. They bring people together in a community. We begin with adults. Parents can learn them along with teachers. They're 16 hours, and we're developing online free modules that we should have ready in the fall. So we have in person, and we will have now online modules that we've developed. We continue to evaluate our progress through research. This study was done in Providence, where all of the pre-K through third grade, the children in Providence and their teachers and their bus drivers and the school nurse and their grandparents and their parents all learned about Mind in the Making. And we found that it really did improve parents' relationships with teachers, and helped children learn skills, and helped create a much more of a community of learners. It was real parent engagement strategy that worked very well. We also learned things that we needed to change through that. So we are always working on trying to do what we do better. So, and we're always asking questions. My third question was, okay, we've developed these modules with these communities, these 5 communities around the country, but how do we know that they'll result in actual behavior change? And I kept looking for something to put in the modules that would help assure that people actually could use this knowledge find it useful and use the knowledge in ways that would actually not just, I say I'm gonna go on a diet, but I don't really do it. Not in the kind of promise to yourself way, but in a real promise to yourself. So along the way, we found a woman named Gabriela Oettingen at NYU. She's also teaches in Germany. And she had spent 25 years doing research on positive psychology, which is, you've heard it a million times, believe that you can do something and then you can. And she would look at all kinds of experiments, losing weight, exercising, better grades, meeting people if you're in a new place, goals that people had for themselves, and found that thinking positively did not result in behavior change. She thought that she had the data wrong. She went back and reanalyzed it, but she didn't have it wrong. She was missing a critical ingredient, which is the obstacle. You can see it there. You do set a goal for yourself in this. You make a wish and you set a goal, and then you think about what the outcome would be. What will happen if you set that goal. So you have a goal that matters and that you think you can do in our modules, and then you see how it would make you feel. But then you think, what's an obstacle? What could go wrong in this? I get home and I'm too tired to exercise, or whatever the goal you have is, or I don't want to ever talk to my children the way my mother sometimes talked to me. I don't want to yell at them. And yet you come home and you're tired and you end up, and your kids look left a mess and you end up yelling. So you have an obstacle, and then you make a plan. If that obstacle happens, then an if then plan. And that's based on the research of Peter Gollwitzer, who found that if then really helps people be very concrete in changing things that they want to change in themselves. So we call it WOOP. She calls it WOOP. We call it WOOP, which is wish, outcome, obstacle, and plan. And it's something that we put into the modules in order to help people achieve something from having taken the modules. So, but that's individual. That's just change one person at a time. What about a larger change? So that was our fourth question. How do we work toward community change? And the lesson there was create a surround strategy, that the research should be in the water, in the air. It should be everywhere that you see it in a community. What we did then was to, at that point, my team and I joined the Bezos Family Foundation, and we created Vroom. Vroom is taking this knowledge and turning it into small bite-sized brain building tips that are based on looking and taking turns and chatting and stretching. You heard me talk about all of this before. These are tips. On one side, there's a tip that take everyday moments that you're with your child, you're out for a walk, you're giving a bath, you're eating lunch. It doesn't take any more time. And then turn them into brain building moments. And on the back of the tip or in the computer, there's always the brainy background, which is the scientific reason why you're doing what you're doing. So you can make a home museum, finding special things, and then have them talk to you about why the items are meaningful. Take turns choosing your favorite thing to share with each other. And then that explains why. So it's just everyday moments. If you're in the grocery store and your kid is fussy, kind of moments. Broom is also a text. So you can sign up for it and get it by text. And it is was fun translating our tips into texts that you can use. And we've had more than 1.5 million people use them, including here in refugee camps. These are in Syrian refugee camps. They wanted them, the IRC wanted them to take Vroom to the refugee camps because it gave people something positive to do in a very difficult situation. We've also put Vroom onto walls for here. This is the Children's Museum of Denver. We took the walls where there's nobody, there are no other exhibits going on, the bathroom wall or the stairs. And we created tips how to walk up the stairs and use it as a brain building moment, or wash your hands, or look in the mirror and make it into a brain building moment. So again, things that you can do, no cost, no extra time, but activities you can do to promote children's executive function skills. We also developed, and you probably know about this from your library work, we've also developed a series of a library of favorite books. And then we wrote, so it's close to 100 books. And then we wrote tips for how you would take that reading the book and have a conversation that promotes brain building. We have almost 1 million of these tip sheets have been downloaded, again, for free. And First Book, who is our partner in doing this, you don't know them, they give books at discount prices for programs that serve low-income families. They've distributed almost 1 million books in our library of books that we selected. Like, is that polar bear, what do you see? The next question, question 6, we're almost at question 7, but question 6 was, how do we adapt the science for the healthcare sector? We've been using it with museums and libraries and teachers and families, but what about the healthcare sector? So the lesson there was begin with residents, begin with a time that people are studying to be doctors, and use the time that they already have in well child visits and infuse the science into those. So we developed a training program. This is with Mount Sinai and their parenting center, a free residency online program where people who are in residency to be pediatricians or anyone who's going to work with children can get this training. We released it about a year ago, and it's being used already in 68% of all teaching hospitals in residency programs in the United States, which I think is a pretty fabulous result from this work. They also did an environmental transformation. They took the space that they had in the hospital and turned it into, put the tips there too. These are the elevators on the maternity floor. Parents are born here. Let's take off together. These tips are written in a different way. We found that when we did them in a hospital setting, rather than have a tip and a brainy background, we needed to do it in a different way. Did you know? Have you tried? It's science. So it takes that progression. Did you know that you can take your patient on a 1-minute vacation when you take their blood pressure? Have you tried taking a few deep breaths and slow thinking about a favorite place? And this is the science about relaxing and dealing with mindfulness as a way of dealing with stress. This is one I particularly love. This is on the nursing station, or people who are at desks and computers in the hospitals. To you, it's just another work day, but to them, it's a day that they'll never forget. Every healthcare interaction can have a lasting impact. And we've tested this at Mount Sinai with people, for everyone who bring the lunch cards to do the hearing testing, in the clinics, throughout the hospital, and found that it really did change the way that people in the hospital, from the person, after you have a baby, who wheels you out with your new baby, to the person who greets you, to the person who brings your food. All of these interactions promote different, all of this training, 1 hour training, promotes a different interaction. So our final question that we've been working on now, this is our question of the moment, is how do we use the science to help adults deal with challenging behavior when it's a discipline issue? And we came up with this formula, which I'll explain. Challenge versus skills versus skill building strategies and an opportunity mindset can lead you to solutions. So I'd like you to take a moment and think of a challenge that you've had with a child lately. Okay, think of a solution to this challenging behavior and use one word to describe your solution. And then if you're online, post it in your chat or just write it down if you're in the auditorium. So let's look at, we've looked already at executive function-based skills. We've just talked about your challenge. So let's go to what skill building strategies are. And this is the research on autonomy support. For a long time, I had wondered wondering is so important in my life. What is the precursor of executive function skills? Where do they come from? What kind of parenting, what kind of teaching promotes executive function skills? And there was a clue. I told you about Stephanie Carlson and the research that she did on taking on challenges. There was a clue in her research. She's been looking at it. She's an executive function researcher, but she was been looking at autonomy support for a long time. And the way that they do their studies is they give children a puzzle. This is a 3-year-old. And he and his mom, there's a puzzle you can see it's a Sesame Street puzzle. It's a little bit too hard for the child. And the parent is told, do it the way you would normally do it. Help your child the way you would normally help him or her. And what they found is that parents will help in different ways. Overall, some parents just do the puzzle for the child or take over. And some parents let the child do it and help the child do it. Some parents give the children choices. Some parents don't. Some parents follow the child's lead. Some parents don't. Some parents understand what the kids are capable of. Some parents are less likely to do that. And all of those things mattered. With older children, this is the research of Wendy Grolnick at Clark University, and she studied autonomy support too, with both little children and older children. This is an experiment where she told the parents she gave the kids a homework assignment. In this case, little boy is writing a poem. That the assignment is to write a quatrain in poetry with a particular rhyme structure. And then the parents are given here 2 different directions. One is this is just for fun, and the other is your child is going to be judged on how your child does. So you set up performance criteria or mastery criteria, in the words of research. And Wendy found that when the parents, the other task was you have 3 pieces of information. Here's a map, and you have to get somewhere, and that's the homework. The parents who were told that the child was going to be judged tended to take over and again do it for the child, versus again giving the child choices and joint problem solving. So out of many studies, we found that this way of being with children, being autonomy supportive, which means there are 3 ways of interacting with children. One is particularly with discipline challenges. One is telling the child what to do and taking over doing it. Another way is letting the child do anything. And the third way is what's called autonomy supportive. And it's very, very predictive. The kids who have autonomy supportive adults in their lives are more likely to have executive function skills independent of the parent's own executive function skills. This is a study that I did with this group, which shows that these skills are not just inherited. And other studies here, you can see them on the page, show that autonomy support can be taught to parents. So what are what we call skill building strategies? There are 5 of them. The first is taking the child's view, understanding what the child is capable of or not capable of, sharing reasons, explaining what you expect and why. It's called other-oriented discipline, often talking about how the child's behavior will affect other people. Giving choices. Choices is particularly important. Problem solving together so that the child is active in coming up with a solution. And then building on what the child is already doing and helping them do more of it, stretching the child, scaffolding the child. So opportunity mindset is the final puzzle. And I'm doing a book, as I told you, on adolescence. And over last summer, I interviewed about 60 parents and their kids. And I felt that there was something that stood in between all of this knowledge and parents actually doing what they wanted to do, being the kind of parent that they wanted to be. So I asked them to tell me about times when they lost it with their kids, when they weren't the parent whom they wanted to be, and what was going through their mind. And as I listened, I began to hear different patterns. One was what I call an adversity mindset. When children do things that are wrong, I worry that they're not going to change, or I worry that it's the way it's always going to be. And an adversity mindset is that things won't be any different. The child won't or can't change, and I can't do anything about it. I can't make a difference. The other pattern I heard is in these four statements, which is that when kids do things that are wrong, I wonder why they may have acted that way. It's an opportunity for me to better understand their thoughts and feelings. I know that it's specific to the moment, and I feel like I can figure out what to do about it. I can make a difference. So an opportunity mindset, and I may end up calling it a breakthrough mindset, I'm not sure, but it is that things can be different. The child can change, I can change, the child can learn, I can learn, I can make a difference. A challenge with a child becomes an opportunity to bring about change in myself and to help the child learn to change. So that leads to solutions. Now I'd like you to go back to the solution that you thought of for the challenge that you wrote down and ask you, did you fix it for the child or didn't you? Did you solve the problem for the child or not? Did people use any of these strategies that we talked about in skill building strategies? Sharing reasons or giving choices or problem solving together? Okay, well, what we've done now is to develop tips that we call opportunity mindset tips that talk about how you use this strategy that we've just laid out. We did a survey of about 2,000 parents and teachers and have their very real problems. And we have how you can use these skill building strategies and an opportunity mindset as a way of handling everyday discipline problems. Here are more of them. So these are the people who have funded Mind in the Making over the years. Just wanted you to know that this journey has been the result of many people working together and many foundations. And I am going to stop sharing. And we're all back together.